Welcome to the first edition of the Routine Jumper Daily Podcast, where we discuss everything NBA basketball. I'm your host, Jalen Dixon, and today we're going to kick off things right, talking about the winners and losers of the NBA extension deadline, talking about some of the biggest NBA storylines going into opening night, and of course, discussing some of the future plans for this page as I look to build the Routine Jumper podcast into one of the biggest NBA platforms here on the YouTube space. With that all being said, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Really would appreciate it. Remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And man, let's just go ahead and get right into it. And let's start off positive. Let's talk about the NBA extension winners. Of course, the NBA extension for contract extensions as well as rookie max extensions was yesterday, and a lot of guys got paid. A lot of players didn't. Depending on the circumstances, their teams are kind of teetering back and forth. One winner for sure were the Houston Rockets with Kevin Durant. Of course, you make the big time trade for Kevin Durant this past offseason that positioned themselves to finally get that go-to number one option to put next to Amen Thompson and Alperen Sengun. You move off of Dillon Brooks, you move off of Jalen Green, and you position yourself now to be considered as a real contender out west after already being a top seed in the Western Conference last season. You now build on that, and granted, they're now going to be without Fred VanVleet for this upcoming season due to the ACL tear, but Kevin Durant is a pretty solid player to lean on, if I do say myself, as a guy that I think you can be able to play offense through, and being able to rely on somebody like Amen Thompson to take over those point guard responsibilities, I think isn't a bad backdrop for this team either. But let's talk about something that CBS Sports reported when they said that Kevin Durant and the Houston Rockets were winners for this extension, saying the Rockets held firm in talks with KD about not giving him a max deal. And ultimately, the two sides were able to find a happy middle ground at 2 years, $90 million. That's still a big contract for Durant going into his age 38 and 39 seasons, but he's shown few signs of slowing down and remains one of the game's elite offensive weapons. Durant wanted to be in Houston and gets a sizable contract, but shows his commitment to trying to win by not demanding the absolute max he could have received. That's not for nothing. The Rockets traded for Durant in hopes for creating an immediate title window, and by locking Durant in for the next 3 seasons, they've done just that. Had the two sides ended up in a stalemate, the pressure would have intensified on Houston to win a title this season. And while the expectations are still to contend, they'll feel like they've given themselves a 3-year window to compete. Again, this is so important because number one, you don't make a trade using a young asset that you did just give a contract extension to in Jalen Green, or a player in Dillon Brooks who was relatively productive for you in his, short stint with the Houston Rockets. You don't just move off of those guys who are both also contract controlled moving forward for an aging Kevin Durant who might mess around and leave you this summer, right? Kevin Durant's commitment to this Houston Rockets team is built off of two things. One, it was one of his three destinations. As most of you probably remember, the Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs, Miami Heat, all places with no state income tax. Just throwing that out there as something that I feel like was a big draw for Kevin Durant in terms of where he wanted to go if he were to be moved, when he was to be moved by the Phoenix Suns. Not only is that a net positive for him being able to get this $90 million in a, again, in a tax-free state, but also it puts him in position to again pretty much see himself into his near 40s as a guy that has a lucrative deal, still allows cap flexibility for the Houston Rockets to get better around him. Also, it helps that Amen Thompson is on a rookie deal. It helps that Alperen Sengun is only starting his new rookie extension, right? This Houston Rockets team is positioned to not only be good for this season with what they currently have on the roster, but they should have the cap flexibility to be able to do even more moving forward because of the fact that Kevin Durant did not take the full max extension, or was not, and they were able to come to an agreement where they were able to meet in the middle where he still gets a lucrative deal without taking the absolute max. This is a win-win for both the Houston Rockets and Kevin Durant, because Kevin Durant now has a long-term deal that pushes him for the next 2 to 3 seasons, where he is pretty much as fully secure into whenever he chooses to retire, which I think would be around age 40, while also giving the Houston Rockets the window they want and the flexibility to make moves on the margins. Another winner, shout out to Tumani Kamara. Bro, what? I think people do not realize because he's been such a solid defender in the league from get go, and more particularly showed off his defensive chops last season as an All NBA first team guy on the defensive side of the ball. People just forget that once upon a time, he was literally a throw in a Phoenix Suns trade to get Yusuf Nurkic, who's not even on the team now, by the way. Just throwing that out there. This Portland Trailblazers team, right, has positioned themselves in a real way to feel good about themselves moving forward with their future. 4 years, $82 million for a guy who's a lockdown perimeter defender, a guy who has the chance to be a perennial first team all defensive caliber player on the perimeter, a guy who honestly most people probably didn't see the upside of being a $20 million a year player when he first was traded to Portland in the first place. Not probably. He was not going to be considered as a $20 million a year player when he first was traded. This was considered a throw-in guy that was just a young asset from the Phoenix Suns to help sweeten up the deal, given the fact that, honestly, it was already tough enough moving off of a former top pick in DeAndre Ayton at the time. You look at the circumstances, right? And you have to really ask yourself, when you look at a guy like Tumani Kamara, and you pair it with the fact that the Portland Trailblazers were able to also re-up on Shaedon Sharpe for around about 23, $24 million a year himself, because I believe he signed to 4 years, $90 million. This puts them in a position where, as a team that's kind of thrown good money after bad, because let's be honest, you know, the Jeremy Grant, the Jeremy Grant deal right now, very lucrative. Now, granted, it's now closer to the back end. Well, he's still got about 2 or 3 more years left on the contract. So, very hefty contract. The Drew Holiday contract that they traded for when moving off of Anthony Simons, kind of a hefty contract. Obviously, the Damian Lillard contract, although is not insanely big, is another, relatively decent number on the books for a player who isn't going to play this season and might not be super productive in heavy minutes in years to come. This Portland Trailblazers team has money invested well in players that I think are going to stick. I think Tumani Kamara deserves to be considered as part of the core for this team moving forward. I think Shaedon Sharpe deserves to be considered as part of the core for this team moving forward. I think that Donovan Clingan deserves to be considered as a core member of this team moving forward. I will say that I think the jury is still out on Scoot Henderson. The jury is still out on Scooter Henderson because his injury concerns have made him somebody that I feel like we haven't been able to really see him blossom. We've seen spurts of it, particularly last year. He had a really strong stretch where he was starting to look like a guy that was starting to put it all together. The game was starting to slow down for him a little bit. And a lot of the compliments that he was given coming out of G League Ignite as a dude who was considered as a well-polished point guard, a guy who seemed NBA ready, who had the NBA speed kind of down pat as a player that could be efficient and effective as a driver and as a facilitator. We started to see signs of that last season, but I think the injury concerns have really kind of put him in a weird position. But let me read something from CBS Sports about this real quick. And I'm going to be using them a lot throughout this podcast as a litmus test for kind of the overall consensus around some of these winners and losers. So they say, given the kind of money we've seen thrown around lately, being able to lock up 2 quality players with upside to 8-figure deals is a win for Portland. There's still a speculative element to Sharpe, but he showed some real growth last year, taking a major stride in terms of his efficiency as a finisher in his third season. He averaged 18 and a half points, 14 and a half rebounds per game, while shooting the 3-point shot is still a big question that will determine exactly what level of offensive threat he can become. He started to harness his explosiveness and has real star upside, especially if the shooting ever clicks. With Kamara, they get an elite level defender on the wing to sign for a team friendly number. That $82 million figure is extremely reasonable for an all NBA caliber defender forward who also shot 37.5% from three last season. To get that kind of deal done without needing to squeeze a guy in restricted free agency, which always strains the player team relationship, is a win for the Blazers. That last part is so important. Not having to get squeezed in restricted free agency this upcoming summer is also a big benefit, particularly for Tumani Kamara. Let's use this past summer's issues with Quentin Grimes, Cam Thomas, the biggest culprit, Jonathan Kuminga. All players who I think were well deserving of getting some kind of significant contract extensions. All three players who ended up signing to the qualifying offer. Well, Jonathan Isaac ended up getting a real contract extension, but he was really up the gun in terms of in terms of potentially having to sign the qualifying offer. Those other two, being Quentin Grimes and Cam Thomas, ended up having to bet on themselves and taking the qualifying offer for the upcoming season. I do not think, if you're the Portland Trailblazers, that gets an ingrown talent like this one into Monty Kamara, who was a knockdown three-point shooter, granted on low volume last season, but still 38% from beyond the arc is still high level, even on 3 to 4 attempts per night. From a guy who was an all NBA caliber defender last season, to play hardball with him, knowing that you were going to have to pay at least 20 million if he has another all NBA caliber season from on the defensive side of the ball, he's going to end up commanding much, much more money. And instead, now you get him on this team friendly deal. Tumani Kamara is one of the best assets in the NBA. And honestly, you can make an argument that the Portland Trailblazers have one of the best cap machinations in the NBA. Look at what they have in terms of their team friendly deals in Denny Avdia, now Tumani Kamara, Shaden Sharp. You still have Donovan Clingan, who I think has the caliber of being a top 10 rim protector in the league as soon as next season. And pair that with also Scoot Henderson, who I think has the upside to be a top 15 guard in this league someday, still on his rookie contract and still has about 2 more cost-controlled years under contract before they have to worry about giving him a real contract extension. This team has one of the better roster constructions in the NBA in terms of team-friendly deals. When you also look at the fact that even though Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard and Jeremy Grant all have these relatively hefty contracts, more so Jeremy Grant and Drew Holiday, they're also relatively movable because in today's NBA, with things being set where the second apron hard caps teams and puts a lot of teams in a position where they can't aggregate draft picks or multiple players, the sizable contracts like Drew Holiday, like Jeremy Grant, allows them to be able to move that one player or those two players for significant assets without having to give up their own draft capital in the meantime. Or if you have to attach draft capital in order to sweeten up the deal, it still allows you to get significant value, either it being multiple young players or multiple draft picks in exchange for those guys. So you have players like Tumani, Shaden, Scoot, Young Han Zen, Donovan Clingan, Danny Avdia, all signed through 2027, 2028. And then you have the flexibility to be able to move off of guys like Drew Holiday and Jeremy Grant for real lucrative contracts down the line to keep this youth movement going. Very solid moves on the margins by a team like the Portland Trailblazers, who has been known for throwing good money after bad for the last couple of years, but this feels like some pretty decent contract moves for them to kind of continue to solidify what kind of youth movement they have going. And I think they're going to be a really special team this upcoming year. Do I see them making the playoffs? No. But they were a team that was on everybody's radar towards the back half of last season. And would I be surprised if they were like how the Phoenix Suns were when they made that run out of the bubble, where they went from being a fringe playoff team to being a team that was really discussed as one of the teams to fear in the Western Conference? I wouldn't be surprised if the Portland Trailblazers were able to do that, given the fact that they have some real veteran presence in the room with Drew Holiday, with Jeremy Grant in that locker room to help them want to play real winning basketball. And Lord only knows if a season from now they also still bring in Damian Lillard with those three guys, and you have Tumani, and you have Shaden Sharp, and you have another year of Donovan Clingan. This year might not be the Phoenix Suns bubble to near championship leap, but I think that next season, 2026, 2027, we might be talking about the Portland Trailblazers as like one of those teams in the Western Conference that's like a dark horse contender with a chance to like really make some noise in the West, given the fact that, the West is also really old, and a handful of those older guys might mess around, fall off a cliff by the time we get to next season. So, a lot of different things to touch on moving forward when it comes to the Portland Trailblazers, but those two guys in particular, Tumani Kamara and Shaden Sharp, being locked down long term, signs of good things to come for them. You guys let me know in the comment section down below who you think are some NBA extension winners from the other day. I think there were a handful of interesting names that did and didn't come up. Let's move on to the losers. Let me know if you agree with these. Some of the losers of the NBA extension deadline starts with Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero came off of a career year last season, became extension eligible, and essentially didn't get an extension because the Miami Heat are prioritizing 2027. So me as Tyler Hero in this scenario, come off of one of the best years of my career for you. I make the All-Star team. Mind you, I've already helped you as a second, third, tertiary option offensively go to the NBA Finals on multiple occurrences since being drafted 14th overall. And I'm in position to re-up in a real way. And granted, Tyler Hero is coming into the season injured, likely to miss opening night against the Orlando Magic. Cool. Understandable. On the other end, I think something about this summer that was very indicative of what I think is going to eventually be a tough, rude awakening for Tyler Hero this upcoming summer is the high volume shooting guard's value in the NBA has never been lower than what we saw this past summer. I mentioned Cam Thomas earlier as a guy who's a high volume scorer, a guy that can be a 20 point per night guy. I think he can do it on a winning team just as much as he can do it on a losing team. But I think nonetheless, your fill up the score sheet shooting guard that is a net negative defender, a player that you cannot rely on to, help you in terms of building a cohesive five-man unit because they rely so much on being on the ball. I think your score first, score only shooting guard is no longer seen the way they were when Lou Williams and Jamal Crawford were winning sixth man of the year all the time. I think you saw that with the value that the Charlotte Hornets didn't have to give up in the trade to get Colin Sexton. I think you see that in the lack of belief in investing long term into someone like Cam Thomas, who was really the brightest light for the Brooklyn Nets last season. And I think honestly might still be their only real quote unquote blue chip prospect on the roster currently, unless you really believe in Day'Ron Sharp, who is kind of started the beginning of his career in and out of the lineup so much that you don't really know what he is just yet. So Tyler Hero is a player that I think for the Miami Heat, when you look at that 2027 summer, might be a guy that's not in the Miami Heat's long-term plans and might be a guy that you have to watch in 2026 in terms of that summer's free agency, a pretty stacked free agency class of its own, in its own right. Granted, 2027 is even crazier because they've got Giannis, Nikola Jokic, so on and so forth. But 2026 might be a time where we see Tyler Hero on the move because honestly, I think if Tyler Hero is in fringe all-star conversations again, and I think he has the chance to be able to do that, especially coming out of the Eastern Conference with the fact that certain players, like again a player like Tyrese Halliburton, who in a weakened Eastern Conference would easily take up one of these guard spots normally when healthy. Tyler Hero has a chance to make the All-Star game again. He's going to command a decent amount, and I don't think that's going to favor them what they're trying to do in terms of trying to keep their books clear. But let's read a little bit more into it, right? Again, same CBS Sports article. Shout out to them because they are going to be driving a lot of this podcast, or at least the first half of it. Coming off of a career year, Hero is also extension eligible, but all indications are he won't be getting an extension from Miami right now. The Heat are prioritizing flexibility for the summer of 2027 when a number of big names could hit free agency. Again, I mentioned Giannis Antetokounmpo. Nikola Jokic is also in that summer as well. Miami has long looked to capitalize on their status as a free agent destination, but for a player like Hero, he will wonder why there's no urgency to lock him down long term. Hero proved last year he can be an offensive engine as a leading scorer, but like Trae Young, who we'll talk about in a minute, his deficiencies as a defender lead to questions about the ceiling of a team built around a player of that archetype. Again, we'll talk about that with Trae Young a little bit later. Teams simply aren't as eager to offer max type deals to players of that profile anymore. Adding to some of the stress for Hero is that he's going to miss time to start this season after offseason foot surgery, and Miami isn't expected to be a strong contender even in a weakened Eastern Conference. That will make it tough for him to add another All-Star appearance to his resume, and if the Heat aren't rushing to get a deal done with him off of his sensational 2024-25 campaign, one has to wonder what his market will look like in 2 summers. Now, actually, if I'm not mistaken, and I have to actually adjust this on the fly, Tyler Hero would become an unrestricted free agent in the summer of 2027, which I think actually doubles down on my point that although they would not be looking to make a deal with him now, there is always a chance for them to give him another extension, but the likelihood of it is all dependent on how this season goes. And now this article, unlike what I just said a second ago, this article says there's a likelihood that Tyler Hero misses too many games because he's already set to miss the first few weeks of the season, paired with the fact that obviously things happen throughout the nooks and crannies of a regular season, 82 games. Tyler Hero can miss more time due to nagging injuries and things of that nature. That what if he doesn't make the All-Star team this upcoming season? That could also be very detrimental for him because if they're playing hardball with him coming off of one of his best seasons of his career, if he comes off of a down year, maybe they treat him as a low priority in 2026 as well. And then in 2027, they let him walk with the anticipation of trying to bring in two max players to put next to Bam Adebayo. There's a real possibility of that. Tyler Hero could mess around and be left holding the bag, not just for this season, but for next season as a guy who's coming off an All-Star year, watches that All-Star year come and go, and then sees the 2027 summer open up, and he may be a coveted free agent, but that 27 class is one that Tyler Hero would probably be like in the 20s, or at least like somewhere between 15 to 20 in a ranking of the most impactful free agents of that summer, given that, all the players that are in that free agency class enter that free agency healthy, right? Because that'll obviously be a big factor as well. Sucks for Tyler Hero because this could also, like I said before, could be a real indication that the shelf life of Tyler Hero in a Miami Heat jersey could be very short, could be coming to a real end very, very soon. Someone else who could be in real question for how much longer they will be in their jersey is Trae Young. I mentioned beforehand the archetype of the net negative the defender when it comes to the point guard position, right? The point guard shooting guard position. The guy who can fill up the stat sheet as a scorer, or in Trae Young's case, also as a facilitator, but you can't build a real true infrastructure around him because he's so net negative of a defender, right? I'm going to just read what CBS Sports has to say, and then I'm going to build upon it. It says, there was a time not long ago where Young would have had a max extension waiting for him in July. The moment the Hawks could have offered it but the moment the Hawks could have offered it. But as teams adapt to the new restriction of the apron era, stars like Young are no longer going to get those offers by default. The Hawks will seem willing to take this into the summer and let the market prove to Young what's out there for him if he chooses to decline his player option. To be clear, Young will be fine long term and will undoubtedly get a big payday next summer if he and the Hawks don't reach an extension during this season. That said, he's among the first young stars to face the apron squeeze after watching so many around him get locked in. Making matters more frustrating is that he finally has the kind of supporting cast around him in Atlanta that seems optimal for maximizing his strengths and masking his weaknesses, but he's not guaranteed to be in that situation long term. The good news for Young is that he will have the chance to show what he can do in an apparent ideal team environment, but even if that kind of prove it season shouldn't be necessary. Very, very simple. Trae Young may be one of the top 5 players under the most pressure this upcoming season. The reason I say that is because Trae Young is in a situation where the Atlanta Hawks have built life very good both for building around him and for building beyond him. What do I mean by that? The Orlando Magic are a team that have been discussed for Trae Young for quite some time, right? And there's a handful of different teams around the league that have put their name in the hat or at least have been thrown in the mix for the potential services of Trae Young moving forward. The Boston Celtics this summer was a team that came up. The Miami Heat have come up in the past. The Los Angeles Lakers are always in context for a potential Trae Young trade, meaning that there's a real market for Trae Young, right? The Atlanta Hawks pick up Nickeil Alexander-Walker this summer. They trade for Kristaps Porzingis, who they're not in a rush to do a contract extension with either, by the way. You have Zachary Risachet on a cost-controlled contract, still moving within his first initial rookie signing, right? You have Jalen Johnson, who when healthy was a 20-10 player last season and was on way to being the most improved player in the league. His teammate, Dyson Daniels, had a breakout season in his first year with the Atlanta Hawks and was the most improved player in the NBA last year. The belief in Onyeka Okongwu is that he can be a real rotational center for that team, a la why they haven't traded him yet, despite the fact that they held on to Clint Capella for so long and they positioned themselves to build out their front court depth with what they did in the draft and, of course, bringing in Porzingis. All that to say that also they signed Luke Kennard. Should throw that out there. They've built this team to have real positional versatility. Nickeil Alexander-Walker could be a starting point guard in this league. I think could deservedly be a starting point guard in this league. Dyson Daniels is one of the better defensive point guards / defensive guards on the perimeter in the NBA. That was proven last season. So you have 2 net positive defenders at the point guard / shooting guard position to occupy that backcourt this upcoming year and for years to come. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a positive 3-point shooter and a net positive defender. He proved that in his time with the Minnesota Timberwolves as a guy who came off the bench, and him and Jalen McDaniels were 2 game wreckers defensively on the perimeter for that team and one of the best duos in terms of perimeter defenders in the NBA, also having that backdrop of having someone like Rudy Gobert as a defender in the paint to help man down the paint, right? Again, Zachary Risachet, internal improvement. Onyeka Okongwu, internal improvement. Jalen Johnson, internal improvement. You also make the trade with the New Orleans Pelicans to get arguably one of the best trade assets in recent memory. Like you're gonna have the New Orleans Pelicans first round pick going in next season. In a year where the Western Conference is so deep, the New Orleans Pelicans, even with Skinny Zion, even with getting Trey Murphy the third back, they still might at best maybe be the 10th team in the Western Conference and make the play-in tournament. This is a Atlanta Hawks team that has built themselves. Excuse me. This is an Atlanta Hawks team that has built themselves for the now with Trey Young, the future with Trey Young, or a future without Trey Young. Truthfully, and the ability to either get real assets for Trey Young and avoid having to pay him long term and keeping their books relatively clean while still having real strong production at the guard position is something that has to really be monitored over the next year to year and a half. Now, do I think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to come to a real extension with Trey Young? I genuinely believe so because he is a franchise icon at this point, and he is a player that I think they have built a real infrastructure around. Where now, as the lead guy with this build of roster, has the real capability of getting back to the Eastern Conference Finals as they did 3 or 4 seasons ago. I think without Trey Young, they still have a relatively high ceiling, but maybe they're just a perennial playoff team. Maybe they're what the Orlando Magic were once upon a time with Nikola Vucevic as their best player. Maybe they're what the Indiana Pacers were when it was Victor Oladipo as their best player. That fringe top 4 to top 6 Eastern Conference seed all the time, right? But not necessarily a team that can really go out and win a championship. I think that Trey Young provides the upside to still put you in that position. Some may not believe that. I genuinely believe that Trey Young can be the best player on a championship team. It's just that he requires a little bit more special treatment in terms of the kind of roster construction he needs around him, a la big time defenders on the perimeter, real protection in the paint from a shot blocking perspective. And he does need other guys who can put the ball on the floor as drivers and slashers because he's a high level facilitator. But he commands so much attention offensively that if he doesn't have guys around him that can be efficient as cutters, be efficient as knockdown, catch and shoot 3-point shooters, it kind of limits the offense a ton. And it's why the offense is always stagnated so much for the Atlanta Hawks when he's not on the floor. It's very similar to Golden State with Stephen Curry. When Steph Curry is on the floor, their offense is top 5, top 7 in the league. When Steph Curry comes off the floor, it's like Steve Kerr doesn't know what to do with him. Doesn't know what to do with the offense. It's as if they don't know how to run things offensively in an efficient manner. And despite the fact that they're one of the best ball moving teams in the league, it seems like without Steph Curry on the floor, they don't know how to find efficient shot creation. And the same thing can honestly be said for the Atlanta Hawks. I think that Jalen Johnson alleviated a lot of that as his point forward build came into fruition a lot more last year, but their lack of perimeter shooting took away the threat of having guys who could knock down threes at a high clip and that you could trust to also be, active offensively as a slashing option as well. Now you have Dyson, Zachary, Nikhil, Jalen Johnson is back, Luke Kennard's on the roster. Asa Newell, you drafted in the draft as well as a rim runner that can also be, a high level lob threat. Everything says that with what they've done, this team should be in the mix for a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference this year. And if Trey Young pulls that off, he will have an extension before the end of next summer. If this team underachieves, I think Trey Young will be on the trade block. That goes to show the volatility of this year for Trey Young. And it's why I believe that he is one of the top 5 players under the most pressure this upcoming season. I think I'll end up doing a podcast episode very much dedicated to that topic alone. But Trey Young is under the gun in ways that a lot of NBA superstars are not coming into this season. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Atlanta Hawks seem primed for life with or without him. And his individual production is going to be the determining factor as to whether or not they decide to go with him long term. I think they should sign him to a contract extension, but I also could see why they're a little hesitant. Some of my honorable mentions, both for winners and losers. As a winner, I think Christian Brown. $25 million a year, 5 year, $125 million contract to play next to Nikola Jokic. Dope. Another loser, the Los Angeles Lakers, or more particularly Austin Reeves, a player who I think is well deserving of a contract extension and a player who I think is going to be a highly coveted free agent if he were to hit the open market. Um, there was a offer on the table, or I think there is an offer on the table worth 4 years. I'll double check it. 4 years, 89 million. So right about in the ballpark of what Tumani Kamara got, or just around what Tumani Kamara and Shaden Sharp got. But the thing is, the Los Angeles Lakers just kind of can't. Now next summer, there's a higher likelihood that they can sign him long term. But the issue is that Austin Reeves has his pick of the litter. So it opens up the opportunity for Austin to go ahead and seek out money somewhere else. Obviously, this past summer, a name that was thrown out as a potential trade candidate for him was the San Antonio Spurs, with the ability to play next to Victor Wembanyama. So that's something that's out there. So the Los Angeles Lakers, unfortunately, financially, are not in position to re-up on Austin Reeves right now, and are going to have to wait until next summer's free agency. But that also puts them in a bad position because they could potentially lose Austin Reeves for nothing if another team is able to woo him away. And then my last kind of like throw out there as a loser, and I hate to end on a negative, but I think it kind of just stands out to me. I think Tari Eason's a really good basketball player. And Jabari Smith Jr., he got an extension, and I think his is like 5 years, 125. Tari Eason, I think, is at least a 4 year, $80 million a year player. I mean, 4 year, $80 million player. I think he's a $20 million a year player. I think Tari Eason is a very solid perimeter defender. He brings a lot of energy. I think when you talk about Houston's defense last season, if you're going to credit someone like Jabari Smith Jr. for them being a top 5 caliber defense last season, you also have to credit what Tari Eason was able to do next to Amen Thompson on the perimeter as well, right? So being a high energy guy, being a dude who I think runs the floor really well, I think is a guy who at the small forward, power forward position helps juice your transition game. Tari Eason is a really solid basketball player. And I think that when you look at some of the archetypes of players that got $20 to $25 million at this extension, Christian Brown, Tumani Kamara, Shaden Sharp even, I think when you look at the athletic prowess of those guys, I think Tari Eason is right there. I think he's maybe not as athletic as those guys, but I think he's in the ballpark of those guys from an athleticism perspective. And as defenders, I think Tari Eason's a better defender than Christian Brown. I know Tari Eason's a better defender than Shaden Sharp. Is he on the par of Tumani Kamara as a defender? There's a toss up there. I think Tumani Kamara has more on ball lockdown defender capabilities. I believe that Tumani, if you had to put him on the best offensive player on the opposing team, and I'm talking about the elite of the elite. So we're talking Steph Curry, healthy Damian Lillard, Trae Young, Tyrese Maxey. You go down the list at the point guard position. And I think even at the small forward position in 2 guard spots, your Luka Doncic's, your Kawhi Leonard's, Kevin Durant's, I don't see him shutting the water off, but I see him being a guy that if you had to put him in a phone booth, in the ilks of, who's some players that come to mind? I think like Avery Bradley, once upon a time, I think is a really interesting comp. I think that There's a couple of guys that come to mind. I think Lucas Dort in today's NBA is another one that I think is really important as well when using this kind of representation. I think Tumani is like arguably like a top 5 guy at that spot, right? But I think Tari Eason is in that conversation. Could Tari Eason be like, if there was a third team all NBA defensive team to vote to, I think that Tari Eason would be on that team? Yes, I do. I think that he legitimately should be in that conversation as a guy that I think is going to be a driver for the Houston Rockets having a top 5 defense, top 10 defense in the NBA this season. So unfortunately, it's going to be a prove it year for him. And of course, the Houston Rockets do have a lot of mouths to feed, and I understand that. But at the same time, I think Tari Eason is very deserving of it. And I think he's going to be a player to watch this upcoming season. Watch out for those Detroit Pistons guys as well. Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey also did not get contract extensions as well. It'll be interesting to see what those guys look like in a prove it year, given the fact that Jaden Ivey is coming off of missing a good portion of last year due to injury. And I think he's going to miss the start of this season due to injury. And then Jalen Duren, who had a positive step forward, I would say, last season, but is still kind of looking for that breakthrough. This could be that. This could legitimately be that. What do you want to call it? I don't want to say like breakout season for him because I still don't think he's there yet. But I do think this could be another leap forward for Jalen Duren as well. So watch out for those Pistons guys as another interesting conversation in terms of guys to watch on the potential like restricted free agency market next summer. Next up, let's talk about NBA opening night. NBA opening night is, outside of Christmas itself, one of the Christmases of the NBA. And the storylines entering opening night, there's a lot of really interesting ones, but there's 3 in particular that stand out. Number 1 is the Oklahoma City Thunder setting the tone in their first game as the reigning defending champions. Now they go up against former Oklahoma City Thunder, Kevin Durant, and a newly revamped Houston Rockets team, not necessarily from a roster perspective, but in terms of their championship hopes. This was a team that, despite finishing high in the Western Conference last season, kind of was just punching above their weight. This year they have real expectations. So the clash between the Thunder having to prove themselves as being able to continue on what was one of the best individual season runs we've seen, while the Houston Rockets have their first official test as a team that for the first time post James Harden have real championship aspirations. The Thunder enter this game and enter the season with Jay Williams on the shelf. Jalen Williams on the shelf is obviously going to hurt them offensively and it's going to hurt them defensively, but it's going to open up more opportunity for Chet Holmgren to be more aggressive as an offensive player, as a guy that already was one of the better two-way centers in the NBA last season. The chance for him to be able to have a real breakout year this season as a 20-10 guy that averages 2.5 blocks per game. There's a real opportunity for him now to have that now that Jalen Williams is likely to miss the first handful of weeks of the season. They also obviously have, a lot of returners from that championship team in terms of what that means for their defense. Cason Wallace, Lucas Dort, Alex Caruso, Isaiah Hartenstein, right? All of these guys are coming back healthy, and unfortunately, Nikola Topic still will not make his NBA regular season debut due to some kind of testicular injury. Not going to get into that too much, just going to say pause. But nonetheless, they are still one of the deepest teams in basketball. And the Houston Rockets are also equally as deep, or at least maybe not on par from a depth perspective, but just as talented with the depth that they do have. So that should be a really interesting matchup. I think the expectations for both of these teams are deservedly high, and I think it's understandable that this was chosen as one of the first games of the NBA regular season, not only because, of course, The Thunder are the defending champs, but because these are two young teams, despite the age of Kevin Durant, two young teams that honestly could end up messing around and facing each other as early as the second round of the Western Conference playoffs this upcoming season. There's real truth to that. So getting our first glimpse of a potential Western Conference playoff showdown in game one is all not just good for ratings, but I think it's a good litmus test for what the Western Conference is going to look like, because these are going to be two of the powerhouses of the Western Conference, and seeing these two go at it to kick the year off, I think will be a tone setter, not just for these two teams, but I think it's going to let us know a lot about just how crazy this Western Conference is actually going to look. And speaking of that, the Warriors play the Lakers. Now, another missing piece in this game, in this game for opening night, LeBron James. LeBron James will miss the opening game, and I believe he's going to miss the first 2 to 3 weeks due to sciatica injury in his back, which means this whole game is going to be headlined by skinny Luka and Steph Curry. My second most interesting storyline is how in the world does the two-man game of Luka Doncic and DeAndre Ayton work? Two top 5 picks from the same draft class, two talented players, granted on two totally different ends of the spectrum in terms of talent, because I think that, Luka Doncic is an MVP caliber player. DeAndre Ayton is probably a fringe top 15 to top 20 center in the NBA at best. If the two-man game between Luka Doncic and DeAndre Ayton works, this will be the most potent offense in the NBA. Truthfully, because the ball handling of Austin Reeves, I believe a lot in Rui Hachimura as a third or fourth offensive option. When LeBron James comes back healthy, you now add that offensive IQ into the mix, paired with the fact that LeBron James is coming off of a career year shooting from beyond the arc last season. He shot 40% from beyond the arc while taking 6 to 7 3-point attempts per game, which is absurd, not just because he's 40 plus, but because the three ball has always been his quote-unquote biggest kryptonite, and at his advanced age, he had one of his best three-point shooting seasons. So if he can continue that trend as a knockdown three-point shooter next to Luka Doncic, who's better, well-conditioned, and maybe more likely to play in transition, something that's always been a knock against Luka Doncic, even dating back to his time with the Dallas Mavericks. There was always the thought that Rick Carlisle didn't want to play up-tempo basketball, and the reality was we see that now with the Indiana Pacers. We've seen that the last 2 seasons with Tyrese Halliburton at the helm. It wasn't Rick Carlisle. It was the fact that Luka Doncic was not an up-and-down, spread the floor, operate in transition kind of player like he was first coming out of, Slovenia, first coming out of playing overseas. When he was first drafted, this was a guy that was very dangerous in the open court. He was a guy that played up-tempo, and he was the precedent for guys like Deni Avdija as this wing-type ball handler that could put pressure on the rim simply by being a dude who picked the ball up off the rebound and pushed the ball in transition. And for some reason, after getting drafted, he just decided to slow down. And he's operated much more as a perimeter player operated more as a half-court player on the perimeter. And I think that with the better conditioning, with athletes like Rui Hachimura, like DeAndre Ayton, like Jackson Hayes, even like Jarrett Vanderbilt back healthy, he has the opportunity now to kind of reignite that fire as a guy who can just simply get easy baskets in transition, or at least create easy offense for this team in transition. One of the biggest things that hurt the Los Angeles Lakers really the last 2 years, but even more particularly last year, I think, was the fact that because they were getting inconsistency from the center position, given the fact that Jackson Hayes was their most reliable option, it put them in a weird spot where offensively it was almost like playing 4-on-5. And in a sense, it really shut down the paint a ton because teams were able to get much more aggressive with them on the perimeter. It's one of the reasons why that Minnesota Timberwolves series was so lopsided. It was because Players like Jalen McDaniels, players like Nikhil Alexander Walker, even Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards were able to just be so much more physical on the perimeter because they didn't have to really worry about the lob threat, the rim running threat. Because not only did they have Rudy Gobert to man the paint, but also it's not like Jackson Hayes is doing anything besides rim running. DeAndre Ayton has the ability to be much more dangerous as a back to the basket player. I think he also is athletic enough to be a guy that I think can finish around the basket around when given real opportunity to get good post touches. And I think that similar to having Chris Paul in Phoenix, I think that Luka Doncic is easily the best player from a facilitating standpoint that DeAndre Ayton has ever played with. Luka Doncic may even be a more elite passer than Chris Paul. More particularly Chris Paul at that advanced age, right? So you get a passer like him, you get a passer like LeBron James, later on in the season. I think LeBron is set to come back in mid-November. You put DeAndre Ayton in a really interesting situation. I think that the two-man game of Luka Doncic and DeAndre Ayton, if Luka is able to get DeAndre Ayton like 8 easy points off of rim running, transition, and solid post touches. If he's able to get DeAndre Ayton 8 points off of facilitating those three things, I think DeAndre Ayton is going to average 16, 17 points and 10, 11 rebounds. Now, most would say, well, Jay, he just did that last season with the Portland Trailblazers. It's a lot different when you do that on the Portland Trailblazers as a team that's still trying to figure out themselves and as a team that has real center depth with Donovan Clingan, Robert Williams, and in this case now also having Yang Hansen now, right? So you're a double-double machine on a team that has a ton of depth at the center position and more particularly is still very youthful and nowhere near the championship contender status that the Lakers are supposed to be in. But I also think that if he's able to just get easy baskets and get into the flow of the game in ways that guys like Scoot Henderson were not able to get him into because Scoot Henderson is not the same kind of facilitator that Luka Doncic is, I think that's also going to help him improve as a defender. And that's the biggest thing that the Los Angeles Lakers need. And that's honestly my third most important storyline going into this game is what does DeAndre Ayton look like as a rim defender against a team like the Golden State Warriors that personally I think does not put a lot of pressure on the rim. Outside of Jimmy Butler, this Golden State Warriors team does not have players that get to the basket on a consistent basis and more particularly do not draw fouls at a consistent rate. Before Golden State acquired Jimmy Butler, they were like a bottom 7 to bottom 10 team in the league in terms of free throw attempts per game. They acquired Jimmy Butler and automatically vaulted into the top 15. I believe it was even the top 12 in free throw attempts per game with that acquisition. Being able to protect the paint is going to be the biggest question for the Los Angeles Lakers this upcoming season because they're a team defense. They do not have a lockdown defender. They do not have Tamani Kamara. They do not have, Alex Caruso. They don't have those kind of guys that can kind of just shut the water. They don't have Lucas Dort. They don't have those kind of guys that can just shut the water off, right? And I think that their team defense, and JJ Redick's even said that before, that they don't have that go-to guy that can just be placed on the best player on the perimeter. So that's going to mean that much more, especially in a game like this one against Steph Curry, who is one of the better paint touch finishers in the league when you're talking about not just around the basket, but has one of the best percentages in the NBA in terms of floater conversion rate. So this will be a really good test because Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, Brandon Bajimski, these are going to be guys, Moses Moody to a lesser degree, these are going to be guys that are going to try to get paint touches. These are going to be guys that are going to try to generate mid-range opportunities, and these are going to be guys that are going to test DeAndre Ayton's ability, not only to guard around the basket, but to be able to guard in space. So DeAndre Ayton, both offensively and defensively, needs to show up. And I'm not talking about just in this game. I'm talking about if the Los Angeles Lakers want to be considered as a real championship contender. Mind you, this team just finished third in the Western Conference in the seeding last season. But if they want to be considered as real contenders, because they're kind of knocked down a peg by the fact that that Minnesota series was so lopsided, it's going to hinge on the health of LeBron James, obviously. But then I think second and most importantly is the play of DeAndre Ayton in the middle. Because we already know Luka Doncic is an MVP caliber player. We already know that. He's probably going to finish top 3 to top 5 in MVP votes this year, if not win the whole dang thing. Now, he has competition with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Nikola Jokic. That's going to be tough. But I think Luka Doncic, if healthy, is going to finish top 5 in votes for MVP this upcoming year. We know that LeBron James, at age 40, is coming off, at age 40 plus, is coming off of making an All-NBA team. So we know what he's capable of. We know Austin Reeves is one of the best third options in the NBA. The question simply now is, do they have the defensive infrastructure in the middle with guys like Jared Vanderbilt, with guys like DeAndre Ayton, to be able to make them a competent enough defense to be able to stay in games? Because I'm going to tell a lot of Lakers fans now, you may have the talent up top to play effectively in a shootout game. But in the playoffs, as proven in that Minnesota Timberwolves series, if you can't guard, your ceiling in the Western Conference particularly is significantly lower if you're just an offensive only driven team. You have to be able to guard in the Western Conference. And particularly, you have to be able to have a high-level defender at the center position, because think about a lot of the centers that are in the Western Conference. Nikola Jokic is in the West. Victor Wembanyama is in the West. Alperen Sengun is in the West. Like, it's pretty stacked out there at the center position. And DeAndre Ayton is going to be tasked with dealing with that, both in the regular season and in the postseason. His play is one of the most polarizing subjects of this upcoming season, because many believe that he has the ability now in a winning situation again to play up to that capability. Others believe that the sour taste of what he's been the last few seasons is a representation of just what he's going to be for the rest of his career, and that the Los Angeles Lakers are not going to get what they paid for in him. I think there's a happy medium somewhere in there, and I think even a happy medium would still be a high-level upside for the Lakers, given the fact that, again, their starting center last year was Jackson Hayes. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below what you guys feel like are some of the biggest storylines going into opening night, and more particularly, what are some of your biggest storylines entering the NBA season? Because although these storylines are very much centered towards the first game of the season, I think all 3 of these storylines apply to the entirety of the NBA season for these teams. The Oklahoma City Thunder have to prove that they can be the first team in the last 7 years to go back to back. We've had a different champion every single year for the last half decade plus. The Houston Rockets have real championship aspirations this year after adding Kevin Durant, but they have to live up to that. Or can they live up to that? I guess is going to be the question all year. The Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler as the second option. Is that enough to be a championship contender in this version of the Western Conference? It wasn't enough last year. Questions around that now that they honestly really don't look that much different from last season, and really only have one real way to improve the roster moving forward, and that's moving off of Jonathan Kuminga, which they can't even do until mid-January at the earliest. And then the Lakers, who their biggest question outside of LeBron James is DeAndre Ayton. All interesting questions for all 4 of these teams, and all storylines that I think are going to be important factors in whether or not these teams are able to be, real championship contenders out west this upcoming season. Last but not least, usually I'm going to end the podcast with a 4th topic, something that's a little bit of a quick hitter. Today, because it's the very first episode of the new pod, I just want to say that I just want to set the standard for what this podcast is going to be moving forward. So first off, this podcast is one that you can catch here on the YouTube platform, exclusively on the YouTube platform, every single day, Monday through Friday, as well as other YouTube videos moving forward. The Routine Jumper Daily podcast will be about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, breaking down some of the most intriguing storylines in the NBA every single day. And then you'll have some one-off videos that I post pretty sporadically. It'll be either be every day or I'm at least shooting from Monday, Wednesday, Fridays of doing videos that basically focus on either one particular player or focus on one particular team or one particular storyline that just wasn't able to make the podcast that day. So there's those, and as well as short form content, reaction content, a lot of different things will be featured here on the Routine Jumper platform. But this YouTube page is going to be the hub for all of those things. Now you can also catch me on Twitter at Routine Jumper underscore. I'll be doing live tweeting during the NBA games. I also will be doing, random tweets about, player stats and doing random tweets about some of the takeaways that I have from certain players and teams on any given night. Um, and you can also catch my content on TikTok where I'll be posting clips. I'll be posting challenges. You can find those in the YouTube shorts. All of these things will be here. I am on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Not messing with Instagram right now. We'll advance to Instagram if things present themselves, but I want to keep things relatively contained and I want to put things in perspective in a way that I think can be maintainable. I think is the biggest thing. I'll also be posting articles on Twitter as well. I'm doing NBA work for a multitude of different companies as far as freelance work, and hopefully we'll be jump starting the Routine Jumper blog as well. So there's a lot of different things going on. So this is the shameless plug section in summarization. Shout out to you guys in advance for like, comment, and subscribing on the video. Like, comment, and subscribing to the channel. Excuse me. To summarize this shameless plug section, Routine Jumper Daily Podcast every single day, Monday through Friday. I will also be posting videos Monday through Sunday, one topic related videos focusing on a player or team every single day. I will be posting reaction content to articles that are released by CBS Sports, Fox Sports, Bleacher Report throughout the week, as well as YouTube videos from some of your favorite YouTubers that cover the NBA on a day-to-day basis. And short form content will also be featured on TikTok, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts. Twitter, I will be live tweeting games, giving my quick thoughts and reactions to different games and different players throughout the week, giving different NBA awards out on a nightly basis, as well as maybe doing some parlay stuff, just kind of to throw out some interesting content for that as well. All that to say that the Routine Jumper platform is finally in full effect. This has been a project that I've kind of been building in the background for the last Lord knows how long now, but now I am officially dropping all content in a multitude of different ways, and I hope that you guys enjoy every second of it. This is the first official season of Routine Jumper, and we are dialed in. So again, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. With that all being said, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I am so appreciative of you guys in advance, and I'm so excited to finally kick off real NBA basketball. This is a really big step for me. I'm not gonna lie. I've done podcasts in the past. I have a podcast with a friend, the Hit Your Free Throws podcast. Check it out here on the YouTube platform as well. I have a podcast called the Magic Latest podcast that covers the Orlando Magic exclusively. Definitely check that out. Link in the description at some point as well. But this is my first time doing something by myself with no real backing behind it. It's a step forward that I've kind of been afraid to take the leap for quite some time, and it's one that I'm very proud of myself for finally taking. And now I just want to be able to be consistent with it, and I want it to be something that allows NBA fans to get a different voice, um, to get a different perspective of the game of basketball, and hopefully I can bring some real nuances that other content creators you watch and listen to either haven't, or I can add to some of those nuances and thoughts to continue to push the conversation in the NBA forward rather than just giving you your screaming match content that we get on ESPN First Take and stuff like that. But nonetheless, I'm just rambling at this point. This has been the first edition of the Routine Jumper Daily Podcast. Thank you again. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.